That music never gets old. Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Mascarenas. Today, we're going to talk about raising money and how to navigate that because sometimes figuring out what kind of capital to go for can be the hardest part of the fundraising process, especially in a world of rolling funds, angels, debt financing, all the things. And to help me talk about all the things, we have three of the best in the business. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
This should be fun. So I wanted to start with Astrid. You are a co-founder of Zebras Unite, and I wanted you to kind of start by telling me and the audience about your capital arm and how what you do, in your view, is different and supports founders differently than traditional venture capital. Oh no, I can't hear you too well.
Hi all, sorry about that.
Okay, there we go.
It's only year 2 of the pandemic. You think I know how to use these platforms by now. Thanks again for having me, and it's a pleasure to be sharing the stage with some of my favorite people. I am the odd one out on this panel, and not just because I'm holding up the German immigrant quota on this panel, also because we, in fact, do not yet have a fund. So Zebras Unite, and I'm pronouncing it the international way because we are an international movement of founders and investors building capital, community, and culture for the next economy businesses. And our approach to capital is multifold. We thought initially maybe we would stand up a fund right from the get-go. And instead, what we have been learning from capital innovators like Brian and others all over the place is that capital is best designed in close collaboration with the community. And so we are taking a deliberate approach to designing new financing mechanisms and instruments in collaboration with specific sectors, geographies, and demographics. And so we're actually using, basically what we're doing is we're unpacking the fund design process that typically takes place behind closed doors and turning that into an open participatory process where we have LPs and other key stakeholders at the table to identify what's needed in a particular industry. So for example, we're just finishing up the first phase of what we're calling a future economy lab in the education space. Secondly, we also are working on creating a sort of a matchmaking ecosystem, if you will, for Zebra-aligned founders and investors. And we're doing this through things like partnering with a bunch of folks who have identified themselves and building a little bit of a prototype for how we can match them up in the community. And then we're also working with platforms like WeFunder, thirdly, to make direct investments into businesses where crowd investing is a good opportunity. And so we have a partnership with WeFunder and building partnership with equivalent platforms in other countries.
Got it. And I'm really curious too, before I throw over to the traditional VCs in the room, on if you actively chose to stay away from the idea of exchanging money for ownership, if that's teams that you still choose to work with, or if you kind of stay away from finding partners that are doing that kind of approach.
Oh no, not at all. I mean, there's a great deal of need for it. So I like to joke at the risk of offending the actual VCs on the panel, right? I mean, there's sort of two extremes in capital, right? Like we have the VC end of the capital spectrum, which garners a lot of attention, but in the big scheme of things, really is just a tiny drop in the large capital pool of capital that's out there. And then on the other extreme, you have bank loans that may or may not be accessible to startup founders, especially if they are from certain demographics. In this country, of course, we have a massive racial wealth gap and access to capital. And so to me, that sounds just like two flavors of capital, right? Vanilla and chocolate. It's not very interesting. If that was an ice cream store, it's just not very interesting. So at Zebras Unite, we're looking to increase the diversity of capital as well as the diversity of managers of that capital. So we're very interested in revenue-based financing mechanisms. We're very interested in non-dilutive early stage forms of support to entrepreneurs who don't have friends and family wealth, right? So to tell them, go raise a friends and family round is really obnoxious and offensive. We're looking at new sort of character-based lending instruments. and a bunch of blended approaches. And so there's just more room on the capital spectrum to color in than just the two ends of the spectrum. And yes, we like aligned VCs, and I would include the folks on the panel.
No, that's great. I'll throw it to Cincinnati. Brian, you are the person behind Lightship Capital, which most recently closed on 22 million, and I hear is also kind of already planning out its second fund. Walk me through how you guys support early stage founders, and kind of why you chose to take this approach.
I am, as described, Astrid said, like boring VC, standard. I'll take the chocolate side of that equation.
Chocolate VC is already better than vanilla.
As long as you're not mint chocolate. I just hate a mint chocolate. Okay, anyways.
You can't tell everybody in this panel is also friends outside of here. But yes, Brian Breckking, general partner of Lightship Capital, to your point, we're a venture capital firm focused on the Midwest and the South. As I think many folks would imagine, that geography is also underserved, just like our demography is underserved. And so when you kind of add demographic issues and geographic issues together, you get a real dearth of capital in the center, really what we call the middle of the country, the mighty middle. And yeah, we're early stage. You know, we invest those $500,000 as much as a few $1 million, and looking for really venture backable, big ideas, same as many folks you see on the coast, but in these areas.
Got it. I mean, I noticed on your website, you noted that you don't require board seats and are willing to kind of bridge portfolio companies to their next round. Can you tell me what went into that decision? I guess more specifically, the first one, don't require board seats, especially at the early stage, feels a little bit more unique compared to other venture capital firms out there.
Yeah, oftentimes VCs talk about designing your product, for your customer, but then they don't design themselves around their customer, right? They completely ignore what they tell people to do. And so we're designed for the underrepresented founder. And for us, that's women, minorities, LGBTQIA+, the disabled. And so the capital path for that founder is different than white male Zuckerbergian founder, as we like to say. So oftentimes Series A is very, very difficult. They have a hard time getting Series A's done with venture capitalists. And so we'll bridge to Series A, for instance. We'll write a smaller check, like I said, $500,000 first, but then we'll reserve $1.5 million so they can go out, meet folks, try to get a Series A done. Oftentimes women and minorities have to do 150%, 200% better than they should have to get a Series A done. So we can say, hey, come off the road. We'll lead a bridge, $1.5 million, and now just go crush it for 6 months and then go back to those folks and show them what you've done. And so to do that, we don't require board seats and things of that nature, but we do require strong collaboration.
Great. And Sydney, you are a principal at Precursor, and I think the first hire other than Charles, if I'm correct.
Yep.
Which is, I mean, at that time, maybe crazy, but I would love to know what went into your decision on joining venture, but also how you see, you've obviously chosen to be a part of this asset class specifically. And so I wanted to hear your kind of reasoning behind why you think this supports underestimated founders in an effective way.
Yeah, I think that it was definitely a long decision to decide to get into VC. I think, took a lot of research, lots of cold emailing, lots of random coffee chats. And I decided that I wanted to become a VC because I saw that there is so much, opportunity for us to capitalize amazing ideas. And I think amazing ideas from people who were basically providing services to what I call like the 99%. I think you could also say my background is, my mom is from West Virginia, a 1,000-person town. It's like the only thing there is really like a women's prison, honestly. And when I was growing up, I was so weirded out by the fact that all my cousins had different lives than I did. I grew up in San Diego, even though my mom's from West Virginia, we moved to San Diego. And so when we would go to West Virginia, all we'd really do is hang out at the Walmart and also go to Applebee's. And it was fine. but it was a completely different life. And so for the people I say I'm building for are the Walmart consumer, because I just think that what they have access to right now, the people who are building for them right now aren't necessarily technologists, aren't necessarily essentially like building things for them to increase their agency, make their lives better, get them more access to products and services. So that's really my focus at Precursor.
That's great. A question that I want to selfishly ask during this panel is if the branding and the phrasing around democratization of venture capital is really leading to true enablement. I think all of you obviously sit at such different tables on a day-to-day basis. So I would love to know, maybe Brian first, for you to chime in, and then Astrid and Sydney on when you hear the phrase democratization of venture capital, is that something that you are energized by, or you think is more noise than action?
Oh, I'm going to go first. I sort of like the spirit of the term for sure, right? I mean, we want to, yeah, these are all good things. We want to democratize venture capital. I would say, oftentimes we are narrative led by the coasts, right? So it's interesting. I did an interview recently with someone at TechCrunch about a lot of folks moving to Miami, where I lived before I moved to Cincinnati, and she was asking about this new surge and that sort of thing. And I said to her, it's not that it's new. If you go back to 2019 data, 6,000 people a week moved to South Florida. What's happened is more people from San Francisco and New York whose friends are journalists are moving. And so now, like, it's their narrative. So I would say I would love for some of these narratives and some of these sayings to come from West Virginia, for instance, and less from the coast, because then they don't resonate as what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, I think it sounds like, Brian, wherever you go, people follow. So watch out for the influx to Cincinnati. I'm with Brian. The phrase sounds great, right? And the idea behind it, but the reality of it. And I should reveal I'm a recovering economist, right? So I'm actually really interested in the sort of the business model of VC firms and funds themselves. And one thing that you realize very quickly is it's really expensive to it. Like the startup cost of a fund itself is an obstacle, is a real barrier, right? And I mean, where do you find the $250,000 to $500,000, right, to basically underwrite your existence for several years while you're pounding the pavement to shop your idea around, right? And so so when we say democratization of VC, the next question is, what are we going to do about that, right? Like, what do we do to actually create an on-ramp for much more diverse talent into this industry, which needs transforming, just like the rest of the financial industry needs transforming, right? And so you see all kinds of initiatives in big banks now, or for how you promote talent, and we're sort of beginning to think about changing underwriting, for example. What I don't see is a concerted effort in the VC industry to create sort of like an apprenticeship or an on-ramp, or however you think about it, some paid mechanism by which people can break in, because it can't be. And I've got friends who basically use their startup journey as a mechanism to then jump to VC. And the idea roughly is, I'll sell my company so that I can take the proceeds to then create a VC fund that is for my community, right? And that just seems really weird too, to spend 5 years building a company so you can sell it, so you have the capital to do the thing that you really want to do, which is deploy capital into people that look like you, that have a life like you, that shop at Walmart like you, that whose experience you share. So I think that's sort of the missing piece for me in that phrase.
Yeah, I think that kind of to both Brian and Astrid's points, the democratization in order to take that idea into action, you need to create structures that actually enable that type of action. And so you need to build structures that allow for different types of people to access VC capital. You need to create structures that allow different types of people to become VCs. You need to create structures that allow for, those different types of companies that are getting funded by these different types of people, additional capital as they grow. And so you need different people at each capital stack. Sorry, somebody came to the door. And so I think that it is a really interesting time to be in VC. I think, when I started at Precursor, I created the list of Black women in VC. It was about 30 to 50 people and it's just multiplied, I think, since then. And I also think that the different type of the intersectionality has also grown with regards to Latinx, gender, non-binary. And I think it's been a really, really interesting time, but there's so much work to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I would love for you to follow up on too is what should founders consider when they're saying yes to all the flashy forms of alternative, or alternative might be the wrong word, but just non-venture capital money out there? What are, both red flags and good things? Because it's hard to say more money in the ecosystem is a bad thing, but I am curious if all that money is, created equal.
I think I'll just jump in here. I think that one of the things that is interesting, and I know this is kind of like hot takes with regards to the NDVC announcement yesterday that I don't know if everybody saw, but they're closing down, which was one, and they were, I think, the frontiers of building new access to capital. And I think one of the things that we saw when we would talk to founders who were considering NDVC capital versus our capital was, do you have essentially does the investor who you would like after you get that NDVC funding, if you decide to go to a VC firm, a more traditional VC firm, can they actually even do revenue-based financing investments? Some people actually legitimately can't, but by the regulatory limits of their fund. And so I think sometimes there's this I don't want to say it's unfair, but it's like you have to make a pretty final decision pretty early on in what type of company you want to build. And I don't think that allows for a lot of the flexibility that is the reality of building a startup. When you build something, you pivot like 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 times before you finally get to something that, matters. And so how do we also allow for more flexibility between multiple different types of revenue structures? I just don't think that exists right now.
Yeah, what Sydney said, I think that point about founders basically getting locked into a corporate structure and an investment strategy before they even really know what they're building or how it's selling is just so, that is so important. That's such an important observation, right? And it's also, I always joke, like 99 out of 100 corporate lawyers will tell you to incorporate as a Delaware C. Right? That may or may not be the right answer. There may be a good reason to become a cooperative, for example. And yes, that will make your life very difficult if you then try to raise venture. We would say, don't try to raise venture when you're creating a cooperative. NDVC, for example, did invest in a cooperative, and they were able to do so under the terms of their fund, right? I think those kinds of So I think there is a need to educate both founders and investors about the options that are out there. And we're very excited about a forthcoming book by Ani Patton-Power, who will describe in great detail, like 20 or so different alternatives to VC through the experience of both the founder and the investor in each of those deals. And I think that'll begin to open up a little bit sort of the space of what's possible in how we match up capital with ambitious founders.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, I'm curious your take too. At Lightship, is it as simple as, okay, you can't come from these capital sources and you can come from these, or how do you draw the line around the kinds of cap tables you can and can't work with?
So we're a little more traditional, but I would say that we love non-dilutive financing before and after.
Touché.
Oftentimes you see founders winning pitch competitions, doing a variety of things just to kind of get from stage to stage. And those have been quite successful for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I mean, the cynical part of me is like, okay, so do we stop telling people to go to pitch competitions? Brian, you retweeted something today that I think came off really interesting, and abysmal actually is probably a better word, which is that VC firms reported that 4% of Black investment professionals and they have 4% of Hispanic and Latino investment professionals, down from 5% in 2018. And so we know that the decision makers might not be looking like people who can think outside the Zuckerbergs of the world. But then what's the solution on meeting in the middle? I know you probably don't have a perfect answer, but what comes to mind?
Yeah, and this wasn't literal, but it felt like they kind of added one minority and subtracted another one, and just kind of called it a wash for the BLM year, which is not what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to increase both numbers, right? We want more Latin, more Black folks at venture. It's tough because it goes back to Astrid's point. Starting your own fund is not a cheap endeavor. I do think there's an opportunity for large firms to ally with those GPs and help to buy some of the GP, maybe buy 2, 3, 4, 5%, and help to seed these early funds, and then that will give folks a chance to really kind of have the time to pitch other folks. I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see that maybe formalized, institutionalized in some ways, so people know where to look.
Yeah.
These are the kinds of solutions that I think ZBrush Unite, for instance, those are the kinds of things that they look at, like how to create more room for folks in this industry.
Yeah, I also think that there's a lot of not just pattern matching with the investments you do, but there's pattern matching with who you hire, and I've just seen so much lack of curiosity, might be actually the best word, of like, what are the things that I don't know about this person who looks very different from me, this person with a very different background, this person who came from a state school, this person who went to a community college, like what might I not know, and what could I know if I hired this person? And I think that is sad, frankly. And I'm hopeful that, as we continue to push the limits on like what types of financing VC firms can get, I saw like even Backstage getting they did crowdfunding for the actual fund, which I thought was really interesting. And so we're starting to see these little, like changes, and just hopeful that they all kind of collide into making this massive movement instead of just all these little moments.
That's great. I think, I mean, earlier today when I was talking to Arlen Hamilton of Backstage Capital, she basically said the words that venture capital wasn't the solution to my world in supporting founders. It was simply what would get me a seat at the table. And I'm okay with, pivoting from traditional venture capital if it means I get to back founders in a more sustainable way, which made me want to turn the question back around on all of you, which is if you think traditional venture capital will be, as important as it is today, 10 years from now. Astrid, maybe you can go first.
Again, I don't think it's that important today. It's such a small sliver of the overall capital spectrum. I mean, if we can figure out how to change the way we do underwriting and commercial banks in this country, right? Or if we can get out of the stupid redlining of real estate development, I mean, there are massive amounts of pools of capital available to create community wealth. So yes, venture needs sort of a professional ethics standard, and it needs a way to on-ramp new talent, and it needs to get over its misogyny, right, and all those things. But there are also, I mean, I think what we're putting, certainly where ZBrush Unite is focused, is more on how do you lift up and create the conditions for more capital innovation across the board, right? Like back to my ice cream store example. Like I want something other than just vanilla and chocolate in that ice cream store of capital. So how can we support experimentation with new forms of capital that is tailored and is responsive to particular communities, right? There's some really interesting experimentation and innovation happening with folks who are creating funding mechanisms that are tailored to Native American tribes, for example, right? Where people don't own their homes, you don't have collateral, you can't get a bank loan. So I think that's sort of like, how do you spur more capital innovation writ large is how I would summarize that.
That's fascinating. That's really cool. I think that I am very bullish on venture capital. I think that, the IPOs just keep coming and they keep getting larger. It's kind of really crazy. And so I think that we're creating an immense amount of wealth, and that we need to be thoughtful, we need to be careful, and we need to be, I think, just considerate of that fact. And so I plan to be in venture for the next 10 years. I think also, to Astrid's point, we're not on an island. We are, we're connected to all of these other different capital stacks, these different communities. And so that's also important, but I don't plan to, my bet is here. My bet is here still.
Yeah, I would say capital will continue to play a large role in capitalism, because the two are hand in hand, and venture capital is a version of that. I will say, just kind of watch what we do. If we can get between everybody, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, start to see billions of dollars into these geographies, these communities, these groups, you're going to see value creation is outrageous. Morgan Stanley and others say that racism and sexism cost this country somewhere between $4 trillion and $16 trillion in kind of untapped value. So venture capital can be a key lever in opening that faucet.
In our last minute here, I'll choose to be a little more optimistic, and kind of add, what's giving you guys hope right now, from the tables that you're at?
Ooh. Okay, well, I'll go first just because this was really exciting that happened last week. It was so cool to see First Boulevard's raise. I don't know if you guys followed them, but they're building basically a black bank, and they raised $5 million from Artemis, Anthemis, and I think JP Morgan. And then in addition to Greenwood, which is Killer Mike's company that's building also another black bank, and then what Capway's building, which is another black bank. There's just so much of this. I just think we're in a renaissance moment, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, my friend and co-founder at Zebras Unite, Mada Zepeda, calls it a Cambrian explosion of capital forms that are emerging, and that's super exciting to witness here in the US and actually around the world.
Only 20 seconds left, so I will post what I'm excited about at Brian Breckine on Twitter.
I love the plug.
Well,
shameless.
I'm looking for that. Yeah, today. I'm looking for it.
And he'll be tagging all of us because we didn't get to plug in our Twitter handles yet. Thank you all so much for joining. Enjoy the rest of the program. To everyone that has tuned into TC Sessions Justice. Take care.
Bye all.